You are listening to Sports and Life with your host AJ Shaw on WSFI 88.5 and WSFV 88.7. We are joined today by Jim Lefevbre from the Knute Rockne Memorial Society. Jim is the executive director. He's a sports historian, speaker, and an award-winning author of the book Coach for a Nation, The Life and Times of Knute Rockne and Loyal Sons, the story of the Four Horsemen, and Notre Dame's 1924 championship. Jim, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Great to be with you.
So I wanted to kind of start out about your group. What got you into kind of studying a little bit about Knute Rockne and the 1924 Notre Dame football team?
Well, it's kind of a personal connection in a sense, in that I was born and raised in a town known a little bit for football called Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Yes.
And in Green Bay, I attended St. John the Evangelist grade school. St. John Parish is the oldest parish in Wisconsin, and it has a beautiful city park and playground right across the street from the parish. And that was our playground growing up and attending that Catholic grade school. We'll come to find out that exactly 50 years earlier, on that very same playground, a fellow by the name of Jim Crowley learned how to play football. And Jim Crowley went on from Green Bay East High School on to Notre Dame, became one of the famous Four Horsemen backfield, starring for the 1924 national champion. So I always had that in the back of my mind, wanting to learn more about him, wanting to learn more about Curly Lambeau, who had gone to Notre Dame a few years previous. And so it's that Green Bay Notre Dame connection that exists to this day that drew me into the story.
And the Four Horsemen, those players were who for folks who may not know about that?
Right. Your quarterback was Harry Stuhldreher from Massillon, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
The halfbacks were Don Miller from Defiance, Ohio, Jim Crowley from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the fullback, Elmer Layden from Davenport, Iowa. They were just four guys who were talented high school players, but there really wasn't recruiting back then. They all chose to go to Notre Dame for different reasons and be part of a 150-man freshman team where they stood out and positioned themselves to be able to make the varsity as sophomores in 1922 and eventually all become starters by the end of that season.
Their offense that year, really their team in general, was just so dominant. They outscored opponents 285 to 54. Now, this was obviously in the early days of football, so there wasn't a lot of scoring on both sides, but their defense, too, was really impressive. In fact, they did not allow over 20 points that entire season in a single game.
Right. It was pretty dominant, and it's a reflection of Knute Rockne's philosophy. He was always trying to design what he called the perfect play. And in his mind, that was when all 11 guys completed their assignment to perfection, and that would allow them to score from anywhere on the field. I mean, before that, football was generally a long, slow slog down the field. I mean, the old adage of 3 yards in a cloud of dust really is what it was. You try to put yourself in position to score a short touchdown. Rockne envisioned something totally different, artistry on grass, I call it. And it was where they could score from anywhere. And so you see some pretty long touchdowns scored in that season. And then, like you say, defensively dominant as well. The closest game was an escape against Northwestern, 13-6.
And that was back when Northwestern was somewhat good. I mean, they've had a history of not being so great historically, but back then they were pretty good.
They had some good teams, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Knute Rockne obviously was known as a master leader. He was very good at motivating his players and inspiring them through unity. When you look at his philosophy, how does that apply to professional sports today and just collegiate sports in general?
Well, I think you strip away all the X's and O's, which are totally different then versus now,
Mm-hmm.
and look at what he did. Look at the motivation. Look at the ability to make space for so many players on his roster. Again, this was at a time where many football coaches took their 11 biggest guys, and that was it. That was the team. They all played both ways back then. And some of them, that's all they'd concentrate on. Rockne developed something he called the shock troops, which was an entire second unit, which he coached to the point where they started most games. In 1924, they started every game. The Four Horsemen didn't start a single game, nor the Seven Mules. The second unit started the entire season and would play up to a quarter and usually play the opponent pretty evenly, while the 11 best players were on the sideline resting. It was a great psychological and physical advantage that Rockne developed. But that's how deep he coached into his roster, and deeper still. He coached fourth and fifth team players like they were regulars, and expected them to know the plays and know the drills and perform at a high level. But when you boil it all down, I think it comes down to human relations. He was phenomenal at connecting with players where they were and finding the right motivational pedals to push, you might say, and to get the most out of his players.
And you look at it too with the way the Four Horsemen were able to change how people perceive college football, especially in that era, because the NFL was just getting started in 1920. It didn't have the same. I would say it didn't have the prestige back then when it first started that college football had, and Notre Dame really had the country's attention because they were so good and they were so talented, and they had this great coach who was larger than life. It really kind of drew the nation's attention in too, correct?
Absolutely, and you're right. Pro football was a mess back then. It was, players were getting brutally injured. Teams were folding during the season, so players weren't getting paid, and it didn't draw anywhere near the crowds. I mean, football was college football in the first quarter of the 20th century for sure. And what Rockne did, of course, was create a team with a broad following, and he did that by playing games everywhere. They talked about they play anybody anywhere at any time. And in 1924, that came to play. They became the first football team, the 1924 Notre Dame team, to play games in New York City, Chicago, and Southern California in the same season. It had never been done before. And that, plus the advent of radio, and just the way Rockne conducted himself and made himself available to the news media, which was mostly newspaper reporters back then, just created this huge national Catholic following, I should add, because of how they traveled, how they connected with, local, not just alums, but Catholic leaders and groups in each city they went to, just created this enormous following.
So I'm looking a little bit at some of the awards that you guys have handed out, as they're called, the Rockne Award winners, and you've had a number of very famous football players and coaches receive these awards, including Barry Alvarez, who used to be the head coach at Wisconsin, Rocky Bleier, who was a Vietnam vet, also played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, multiple-time champion in the NFL. Talk a little bit about your awards and what needs to be done for those folks to end up getting awards like the Distinguished Service Award or the Champion Award or the Courage Award.
Right. Well, the Knute Rockne Memorial Society was founded in 2017 and immediately made our first initiative to be the annual Rockne Spirit of Sports Awards. They're largely given to people with the Notre Dame connection, but they can be in a variety of different fields. The first year's awards happened right after the death of legendary coach Ara Parseghian. So we honored the memory of Coach Parseghian with his family, and then several staff members, assistant coach Brian Bullock, longtime sports information director Roger Valdesari, and then several players, including the great Rocky Bleier. And then in subsequent years, could be anybody from Johnny Lujack, a great Heisman Trophy winner, to Muffet McGraw, head coach of the NCAA champion women's basketball team, Alan Page, Luther Bradley, John Hewart, a bevy of great football stars as well as others who've contributed in some way. And it's a very impressive list, as you can see on our website, and we just are happy to add to it every year and never lack for a number of quality candidates and nominees.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the awards last year. Coach Jeff Jackson, the 20-year hockey coach Notre Dame, he won the Leadership Award. Bryant Young, the NFL Hall of Famer, with the Champion Award, and Coach Digger Phelps winning the Living Legend Award. That was definitely a star-studded cast of award winners for you last year.
It was absolutely, and they all gave great acceptance speeches, and we even had one looped in by video because she couldn't make it in person. And That was our communication winner, Hannah Storm, who
Mm-hmm.
was still working for ESPN on a Friday afternoon. So we had to do that by video. But yeah, just a great group. And we've got another interesting group lined up for this year where the Rockne Awards will happen in Green Bay
Mm-hmm.
on September 5th, the day before Wisconsin meets Notre Dame at iconic Lambeau Field on September 6th. So we're very excited to be going there.
So we are based in Chicagoland, but we also go into Wisconsin, and one of our advisors here is Patrick McCaskey, who's one of the owners of the Chicago Bears. I'm assuming you're a big Green Bay Packer fan, so I don't know if some of our audience is going to love that.
Well, it kind of comes naturally when you're born and raised there. And
Yeah.
then in my 8 years at St. John the Evangelist School, the Packers played 6 times for the NFL championship, won 5 of them, and created just a legendary uh, period there under Vince Lombardi.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another neat connection is that Jim Crowley, besides being one of the Four Horsemen, like many of Rockne players, he went on to a great career as a coach. And he was an assistant coach at Georgia to another former Rockne player. He was head coach at Michigan Agricultural College in East Lansing, Michigan, until he got a much better job at Fordham University in New York City. And there he guided Fordham to by far its greatest period of football success, including numerous finishes in the top 10, top 20 in the country, a couple of bowl games. And there he coached the famous 7 blocks of granite, their famous line,
Mm-hmm.
and that included one Vincent T. Lombardi.
Yeah.
So Crowley coaches Lombardi at Fordham and helps complete, the Green Bay Circle, you might say.
So I interviewed Pat McCaskey when we were starting this show, Sports and Life, back in December, and he told me a very interesting story. His grandfather, George Halas, and Vince Lombardi, they both had a really good relationship that I didn't know a whole lot about. So that was something kind of cool, a connection that they have. Even though the Bears and the Packers had such this intense rivalry, both men really respected each other. So that's something I learned from Pat that I thought was really interesting.
There was tremendous respect and in some cases material assistance. And I'll give you an example of that fits into our Rockne Awards this year.
Yeah.
There was a family in Chicago called the Venices, and they ran a grocery type slash restaurant type of place not far from Wrigley Field where the Bears played, and they became great friends with many of the Bears players
Mm-hmm.
and had them over to their house. So young Jack Venisi from that family goes on. He goes to Notre Dame. He plays freshman football in 1945 and then goes off to the service where they found a kind of a heart irregularity, so he couldn't play sports anymore. Graduates from Notre Dame in 1950, and George Halas sets him up in his first job with the Green Bay Packers. They
Really?
needed help in their business office, so here this young Notre Dame grad heads off from Chicago, heads off to Green Bay. He ends up becoming involved in scouting, and Jack Venisi revolutionized the entire field of collegiate scouting for a pro team and was involved in the Packers' selection of so many of the great stars from the 1960s, Starr, Horning, Taylor, Dollar, Wright, Kramer, right on down the line, based off of his intricate, scouting program. And so his memory and his family actually is going to be honored at this year's Rockne Awards.
Well, that's awesome. That's a great story. I didn't know about that.
He's a tremendous figure, and the sad part of his story is that before the Packers of the 60s played a single playoff game, in November of 1960, he dies of a heart attack at the age of 33. So he never saw the fruition of all his labors of being involved in all these drafts. But his family, including his 93-year-old brother, Dr. Sam Venisi, are great advocates. They're trying to get him into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I think they make a tremendous case for someone who is so instrumental in a team winning multiple championships and the first two Super Bowls and everything like that. So we're actually working to publish a book about him, and like I say, honor the family at this year's Rockne Awards.
And that's something that a lot of people don't know when they look back at pro football history. Vince Lombardi really didn't draft most of those players. He got there in 1958. Most of the work to bring in those great players like Horning, Bart Starr, Jerry Kramer, Jim Taylor, a lot of that was done before Vince Lombardi got there. He just was the right coach for that team to put them in a position to win championships.
Right, exactly. And um, I would say much like Rockne, he was a master motivator and found, just the right contact point, for each player, who needed encouragement more than a kick in the behind and that type of thing. And of course, he had a great relationship with Horning, who drove him crazy sometimes, not following training camp rules and that type of thing. But of course, leading to one of the supposed greatest lines of all time, one time when Lombardi caught Horning and Max McGee, out past curfew, said that'll be $500 fine for each of you.
That
And
was a lot of money back then.
it was a lot of money. He said, and then he added, and if you can find anything in this town worth $500, next time I'll come and join you.
That's funny. I didn't know that story.
Supposedly.
$500. That was quite a bit back then. When people look at Rockne, a lot of people who may not even be football fans, they know about George Gipp, or as Ronald Reagan famously was called, the Gipper. He played George Gipp in the movie. Talk a little bit about the relationship Rockne had with George Gipp.
Uh, well, it was very special and very complex. Again, George Gipp was not he wasn't a dumb jock. He was a very, very brilliant fella. He just didn't want to go to class.
Mm-hmm.
And so that caused some problems. Sometimes he didn't want to practice, and that's caused some problems. Sometimes I wasn't sure he was going to enroll in school for another year, so Rockne had to go chase him down in Michigan and cause some problems. But of course, he was such a singularly talented player, could do everything on the field to a degree that nobody in his era really could. I mean, he was clearly the best player in the country in 1920, and certainly the cornerstone of Rockne's first couple of undefeated teams. But find it interesting that after Gipp's death in December 1920, Rockne confided to a friend and said, as great a talent as he was, that's not what I'm looking to have. I'm looking to build an entire team, a team that's deep and complementary and is a collection of great guys working hard together for a goal. And really, that's what arrived on campus in 1921, all as freshmen, the 11 guys who turned out to be the Four Horsemen and the Seven Mules. So that's why 1924 really is the pinnacle of what he was trying to build.
So I'm sure you've heard about this, but it looks like that USC and Notre Dame are going to continue their rivalry going this year. Rockne played a big role in that also becoming a big rivalry that we've seen in college football now for almost 100 years, a little over 100 years.
Absolutely. And it again goes back to the 24 season, which concluded with the 1925 Rose Bowl against Stanford. So that was the first trip they made out to California, out to Southern California, and fell in love with it, really liked the place. So much so that after the first trip to play Southern Cal, Rockne agrees to become Southern Cal's head coach. In one of the more bizarre stories.
Yes.
Um, just one problem with that is he was still under contract with Notre Dame, so the whole thing had to kind of be walked back. But that's how much Southern California and its then fresh air and orange groves and Hollywood stars and everything appealed to him. But what it did is, that Rose Bowl set in course the idea of making a trip out there every other year, and then that plays into Notre Dame's 45-year span of not going to a bowl game because they figured we're making these trips to California anyway. That's going to be our bowl game every other year. So for 100 years, it's been a great series, and certainly hope that it can continue.
Yeah, it's one of the best rivalries in college football, and people love those games. They're usually played later on in the year, and whenever USC comes to South Bend or they head out, or Notre Dame heads out to LA, those games are always pretty much packed at the Coliseum or out in Notre Dame.
Yep.
A couple more questions I have for you. 1923, they go and play Princeton, and this was back when Princeton was definitely the top team in college football. That game was truly a monumental shift, though, because the Irish go in, they're able to beat the Tigers at Palmer Stadium, and that really kind of led the way into what we saw in 1924.
Exactly. It's just a huge victory. Princeton is literally defending national champs from 22. It was a great coup for Rockne just to get them on the schedule, to
Mm-hmm.
schedule a trip out there. And the way that Notre Dame performed in that game, and then again the next year in 1924, making the same trip out to Palmer Stadium, just a week after making the trip to play Army. Some people say, well, why wouldn't they just stay out there for the week? Princeton being so close to New York City. Well, that wasn't how the fathers at Notre Dame wanted things done. So after beating Army on October 18th, 1924, in the famous game where Granlund Rice penned his lead about the Four Horsemen, on that Sunday, they got back on the train all the way back to South Bend, 3 days of classes before getting on the train to go back out to Princeton and beating the Tigers for the second straight year. But you're absolutely correct. That was a huge shift that really, I don't want to say spelled the end of Eastern dominance, but it was monumental in the shift of power from east to west.
Absolutely, I think you make a great point right there. I read here it was a $5,000 guarantee. There was no split of the expected large gate. The Irish would get to take on a bedrock of the Ivy League and Protestant establishment, a major boon for their national prestige. That's what school officials felt. And like you said, and like I mentioned too, it definitely changed the way college football was viewed. We've been talking a lot about Rockne's personality, and something that I find very interesting today, and there are a few exceptions, but really in college and professional sports, especially now in college with NIL starting to become a big deal in the transfer portal, it feels like the personality is gone with these coaches. These coaches are, in a lot of ways, they could get fired at the drop of a hat. I mean, they are getting fired at faster rates than ever before. You really don't see that personality, I feel like, anymore, and the connection with the program and the connection with the student body.
Uh, I think that's largely true.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, one reason that Marcus Freeman is such an exception to the rule these days, because he truly gets it. He truly gets what Notre Dame is about. He gets the idea of a an agreement between the school and the player. I mean, he's out there signing phenomenal high school players with the intent of them staying at Notre Dame for 4 years and getting their degree. And that's certainly become, the exception to the norm these days, where these guys, a lot of these coaches just become collectors of talent, then and it comes from a different spot every year. Notre Dame I don't believe, is ever going to be so thoroughly dependent on transfers. They'll get a few key players in certain spots, but Marcus Freeman is really developing those relationships, and you talk to players as to what they feel about him. It's just phenomenal. And it all comes from, I believe it all comes from trust and respect.
Mm-hmm.
They trust that he's going to have their best interests at heart. That's exactly channeling Rockne. Rockne's players would go through the wall for him because they trusted that he was going to look out for them. And he did in his ways, including helping set them up in coaching positions and athletic administration positions after they graduated, if that was their interest. Many of them were. He didn't want to see his players going to pro football because it was such a mess, a dangerous pursuit. He wanted to see them on college campuses coaching and administrating sports. Dozens and dozens of them went into that. And, largest coaching tree of all time. At one time, more than half of today's Southeastern Conference were coached by former Rockne Notre Dame players. And again, it's that feeling that he was able to meet them where they were and just generate this incredible trust and respect that made them, not just perform for him, but achieve great things no matter what they did. With Rockne, so much of it comes down to inclusiveness,
Hmm.
coaching deep into the roster and showing as much care for the fifth stringer. I mean, an amazing thing I found in my research were these letters that he wrote every summer. They were not form letters, they were individual letters. And I started looking at who the letters were to, and they were to fourth, fifth, sixth string players, mentioning something personal to them and mostly encouraging them to come back for another year of college because there weren't scholarships. It wasn't a 4-year contract back then. Everybody, could have just disappeared. But he encouraged them to get another year of schooling to come back for another season and of course, play some football too. So it was that way that he endeared himself to, everybody under his sphere. And the other interesting thing is I get so many people asking me, I think my grandfather played football at Notre Dame for Rockne. So I take the name and I start to do a little research. I don't find him on the list of starters or letter winners, monogram winners, or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that they didn't, quote unquote, play football at Notre Dame under Rockne, because he had 150 players on the freshman team, another 100 on the varsity, and he oversaw the entire interhall system of 8 or 10 interhall teams of 30 or 40 guys each. And he would literally set up off-campus games and arrange for travel and referees. I mean, he took his athletic director job very, very seriously. And at one point, you had more than a quarter of the enrollment at Notre Dame playing full equipment organized football, and that was all Rockne. But at the same time, again, it's how he treated everyone. And it was said that if you met Rockne once, you were his friend for life. How he treated the porters on the trains, how he treated waiters, how he treated, people who couldn't, quote unquote, do anything for him. And that's, to me, the real mark of a true leader and, somebody truly living out their values.
Respect. That was the key thing that he had. Respect.
Yep, definitely.
How do you think he would have viewed this current era of college sports?
That's a question I get. And again, in his own time, he would not only help some of his former players connect them to openings in coaching and athletic administration, but he would advocate for them too. And you'd find a letter that says, they're offering 2,500 for this position. I think you can get 3,000. That was an annual salary back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, did he want to see coaches well compensated? Sure. I think we've reached that point.
Yes. Understatement right there.
Yep. Paying the players, that's a good one. I mean, I think generally he might be in favor, but with some definite guardrails around it, which don't currently exist, sadly. I mean, he would want to see things much more prescribed, much more contained than the current state that we're in.
Yes.
But people, a few years ago, Notre Dame put in artificial grass and a new scoreboard, and people are saying, "Oh, is Rockne turning in his grave?" And it's not really. I mean, he was for improvements. If it
Yeah.
improved things in any way, shape, or form, he was all for it.
So my last question here is, on your website you have a donate page. Your website is www.rocknesociety.org. For those who are interested in donating, what do they have to do?
Just go to the website. It's all pretty simple and straightforward. Like you say, rocknesociety.org. And in the coming days and weeks, there'll be a lot of information of all the events we have planned for Green Bay. We're calling it the Rockne Lambeau Football Festival, with events over 3 days, Thursday, September 3rd through the game on September 6th. There'll be a golf tournament. There'll be a history night. There'll be the 10th annual Rockne Awards. And people can also sign up on the website to get the regular updates on all of our activities. But we're happy to do this work, to keep Coach Rockne's name and story out there in front of people, because I think it's very important these days to recognize any and all that are good and that live out his values and characteristics.
That's rocknesociety.org. Jim Lefevbre, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.